How are you, Peter?
Everything's going good, Rich. I just have one very quick comment about your thing about draft picks and, and sort of saying who was picked. You know what I noticed last year? Last April. So I was with the 49ers.
Yes.
And I was there, with them, sort of embedded with them on both of the first two nights, okay? And so as the picks got going in the first round, and, inside a draft room, they know the picks, 2, 3, 4 minutes before Roger Goodell was doing it, but would announce them. And at one point, when a couple of picks happened very quickly, right in a row, it was like 7 or 8 minutes elapsed between it. And so I'm honestly a little bit surprised that there isn't more of sort of the leaking of that. And I know in the NBA, just from what I've read about it, that because they're competing entities, that they're certainly not going to make a deal with the NBA to not, telegraph the picks. And so, and plus, I'm not really sure that it does things, that it does such deleterious, that it has such deleterious effects to the telecast of the show anyway. But those are just my thoughts.
Well, I mean, let me give you, let's have a conversation on this before we get to Derek Carr. Because trust me, I am very well aware of how those picks are getting backed up like planes sitting on a runway at LAX, because I am getting antsy. I want, as soon as that pick is in, I want it announced and I want it out there, because I understand that I'm getting scooped on Twitter. There's no question about it, that it's getting out there, and that if somebody does have a second window open watching the first window, which is, I'm hoping, considered the NFL Network coverage of it, that anybody who's watching thinks that I'm as up to date as they are, and thus play acting to try and create drama, whereas Mayock and I are sitting on that set now with DJ and Charles Davis. We are thoroughly in the dark, and we are kept that way because we want to be surprised just like everybody else. And until that is no longer the preferred method of draft information delivery, I don't think there's going to be any change. And I think the league is going to try and keep a clamp down, certainly in the first round, of tweeting with their partners. I think that's the way it's going to go.
Last year the league got very upset with Albert Breer doing it on our site and doing it through his Twitter account. And I understood that. Now, when I was in there, I'm the one who offered disagreement, but I was not looking very much at all, other than during breaks, on Twitter or anything. I was just in the moment in there. I mean, you look at my timeline, I don't know that I said anything the entire first night of the draft, until it was over. But be that as it may, I think my point is that when you have such a gap between the time the actual pick was made and the time the actual picks are announced by Roger Goodell, in my opinion, I don't want to say you're asking for trouble.
No, you are. Peter,
you're encouraging people who are competitive reporters, to just say, "Oh, okay, we won't say anything about this." Well, I'm not an employee of the NFL, and I understand, and I do understand that if we're talking about 20 seconds, I get it. But if we're talking about 5, 6, 7 minutes, I'm not a big fan of holding on to information that for that long.
Peter, and I'm absolutely with you on that in terms of asking for it. The league definitely wants to have, for the NFL draft, a little bit of a show within the arena, as well as a nod to the past. Sometimes the commissioner, as you know, will come out with a veteran player, a retiree, or with an actual United States veteran, somebody who's out there.
Which is fantastic.
I know, but sometimes to be very, like, the veterans either could literally be in the John when it's time to get out there, or ESPN's on break and NFL Network isn't, and they're waiting for ESPN to come back from break. Those are just, not to get terribly deep in the weeds, but that's I don't know what the solve is on all that. And also, just to put the button on the conversation, you could have stopped your sentence with the league was upset with Albert Breer and just put the period there. You didn't have to finish the sentence, Peter.
Well, look, I understand that there are some people in the league who over the years have had their problems with Albert, but I know that
we love Albert.
I know that
he's awesome.
I know that as an editor-in-chief, which now I am, I'm extremely happy that he works for us. I'll just tell you that.
As well you should. Okay, what do you make of the Derek? What do you make, Peter King of the MMQB joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show? What do you make of the Derek Carr signing and the ripple effect?
I mean, all I can say is good for Derek Carr, because what happens in the case of football, football salaries, essentially, is that once Andrew Luck signs for $24.6 million a year, the next mega quarterback, whoever it is not going to sign for less, and that's all there is to it. And so now Derek Carr gets to be the first $25 million player, average contract in NFL history, and good for him. He's very deserving. He's a young guy who means everything to that franchise. And as somebody who's gotten to know him a little bit, I can just tell you that this guy is a perfect, not only representative of the Raiders, but perfect representative of the NFL. And if you saw what NFL Films did on him during the Indianapolis game, I think either Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, whenever it was, when he got hurt last year, how awesome a leader he is on the field. He's unbelievable. So good for him. But I'll just say this. Like, my first thought when I looked at this contract was, well, it's great. He beat everybody. But in essence, he goes $25 million a year. Luck is $24.6. Breeze is $24.3. Carson Palmer's $24.4, and Kirk Cousins is $23.9. So it's not like he wiped the floor with everybody. But I am going to say this, that the reason why I think that he just barely beat these guys is because he's different from Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins, because he's starting at such a low level. And that's why I think his agents did a really good job. Plus the fact that in the last 3 years of his contract, Adam Schefter very wisely reported this morning, that in the last 3 years, his contract will be paid by a corporation in the state of Nevada. And it could be the last 4 years, depending on what year this franchise actually moves to Las Vegas. But at least in the last 3 years, whatever the number is, he'll save $3, $4, $5 million on the contract by not having to pay any state tax versus the onerous. And look, we all as Americans, especially very wealthy Americans, should pay our share of tax. Don't get me wrong. Yep. But I'm saying it is a huge advantage. And part of what people should think about when they think of this deal, that the tax ramifications are so good for him in the last 3 years.
So then who's the quarterback that heard about this deal, who's coming up in short order, that is high-fiving with their agents right now?
Well, probably Matthew Stafford. But look, I maintain this. I have written this. If I had to bet 2018 team for Kirk Cousins, it would not be Washington. Because although they could franchise him one more year at 34, whatever, and probably they should. Okay, I know there are those in that organization who say, Jay Gruden's brilliant, we'll win with somebody else, we'll play, Colt McCoy or pick somebody else up, whoever. Okay, and look, I'm not saying that Kirk Cousins is Johnny Unitas. I'm saying he's pretty darn good, and I think that if he plays in 2018, it'll be for the franchise tag. Because just my opinion, it's nothing that he's told me. Believe me, and I know him a little bit. I traveled to England with him on a trip where he was going to spread the gospel of NFL football in April. But I just think that there's a little water under the bridge there with how the team judged him and sort of treated him over the last year or so in terms of the negotiations for a new contract. So I think that Kirk Cousins either plays for the franchise number next year in Washington or plays on a long-term deal as a huge free agent somewhere else.
Well, where does this all wind up, Peter? And by that I mean this, is that we're soon going to have half the starters in the NFL one day. Maybe that day is not next year, perhaps the year after. We're going to have half the starters in the NFL making, on average, over $20 million a year. And on average, about 10% of them will have had a Super Bowl.
Half the starting quarterbacks.
Correct. Half the starting quarterbacks in the NFL will be making over $20 million a year. And on probably just spitballing here, 5 to 10% of that group will have a Super Bowl ring on their resume. That we're
but I mean, here's the way I look at it. Rick.
You're paying gunslingers basically who amass fantasy football numbers, but when it all comes down to it, playoff wins are not on the resume for a lot of these guys.
I would agree, but the fact is now that an above average starting quarterback in the NFL is a $20 million player. Period. You might like it, you might not like it, but I think that what also contributed to this, and nobody talks about it, okay? I mean, look, my jaw doesn't drop at Derek Carr making $25 million. It just doesn't. That is what a great player in the NFL should make, and I think this year he will cement himself as one of the great quarterbacks, one of the top 10 consistent, really good quarterbacks. But I think what nobody is talking about and should talk about is Mike Glennon making whatever he made, $15 million. So in other words, we're paying guys who we really don't know about it over a short term, say 2 years. We're paying them $15 million when we have absolutely no idea. And they haven't done it, but we're just paying them because we want to get it. So many people poo-pooed the Mike Glennon contract. And look, I like Ryan Pace, but I happen to think he was competing against air, and I just do. I think Mike Glennon. If you want to sign Mike Glennon for $8 million a year and give him a ridiculous incentive package, great. But I don't know why, and I don't know how you pay absolutely unproven quarterbacks $15 million a year. I do not get that, and will never get it.
Well, last one for you then, Peter, is because I am not against, and I'm sure you would say the same thing against those getting theirs. I mean, if that's what the market bears, it's what the market bears, and if that's what it can be afforded, it can be afforded. It's not our money. But out of whose pocket is it coming? Out of whose expense on a roster does it come, with the salary cap being chewed up by so much of one player, and many of whom have not
Rich,
won?
You know what you have to realize, though? If the salary cap went up this year 7%, which I think it did, and last year it went up, I think, 8%, okay? The salary cap is continuing to rise. And so you have to speak about $25 million in relative terms. I would bet that the best quarterbacks in football 15 years ago made no bigger percentage of the salary cap. I'd love to look that up, in fact. That the quarterbacks 15 years ago made no different or bigger percentage or less of a percentage on average of the salary cap than the guys are signing for now. So really, what does it matter? I don't think it's a big deal. And I don't think that because Derek Carr, who you always knew, if you have a great quarterback, whatever the number is, 23, 25, 27, whatever it is, whatever that number is, you're going to pay a really good quarterback in this league. You always have, you always will. The only one who's been significantly below market value in general has been Tom Brady, because he's always had this deal with the Patriots. And this is unofficial, this is not a deal, but he's always basically had this deal where, hey, look, if you pay the rest of the team, as long as you spend the cap and pay, the rest of the players the money that I could hold you up, do a stick up with, I'm fine with that. And so even though he's made great money, he definitely, Peyton Manning got every last dollar mostly when he played. Brady just hasn't been that way.
Peter, thanks for the chat. Enjoy the Big Papi retirement ceremony tomorrow night. I'm sure you will.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rich. Have a great week.
You got it. That's Peter King from MMQB.com joining us here on The Rich Eisen Show.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on radio stations across the country and audience.
If you like that video, be sure to download our app. Don't have any memory on your phone? Let's start to delete some of those slow-mo videos you have. And you know which ones I'm talking about.